Look, it was fun while it lasted. The 3-1 jokes, the Cancun, everything pretty much associated with the Los Angeles Clippers over the last couple of months has just been a joke. It's just no other way to put it. I'm sorry, Clippers fans, that's the reality. But, okay, let's just get over it now, and let's actually look towards the future. And let's keep in mind, this Clippers team is still a very, very good team that just got better. They got stronger. And sure, you could argue they didn't make it to the Western Conference Finals, so they needed to get better. But even as the big Nuggets fan I am, saying they should have been shown more respect before the playoffs because they weren't given that respect. The reality is the Clippers should have been able to take care of business. They showed they had enough talent to beat a team like Denver, and Denver are a very good team. So if they showed that, then I'm pretty confident heading into next year, they're going to be pretty good. And I think people are just starting to sleep on them. It's funny because that's kind of how it works. You get these high expectations of someone or some team and they don't deliver on those expectations. Straight away, they're just completely out of your mind. Particularly if they do it in such a comical and terrible way like the Clippers. People just forget about them. They just put it away and it's like, oh, they lost 3 games in a row and it was really funny how badly they lost those games because they blew leads on 3 separate occasions. But I've got news for you. The Los Angeles Clippers are still really good and let's talk about it. Now, before I even get into that, if you could drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, that would be much appreciated. Anyways, so they fired Doc Rivers. He's someone who's blown multiple 3-1 leads. I don't think we can put it all on Doc Rivers because we've heard everything that came out about that locker room, and clearly that locker room was toxic. There's just no other way to put it. And there's still a lot of players from that same team, so there's going to have to be some internal kind of conflict to get all of this stuff out because you can't go into next season with everything that's been said. Clearly, there's some people that felt some kind of way, particularly towards Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, and you can't go into next season without that being sorted. Now, with that in mind, I wouldn't be surprised if 2 of those players were JaMychal Green and Montrezl Harrell. Definitely 2 of the most outspoken players in the entire NBA. Those 2 don't mind saying quite a few things, so those 2 are now gone, and the reality is, I think Montrezl Harrell clearly had some kind of things going on in the locker room with guys like Paul George because there was words about that, there was rumors about that, and then he doesn't get re-signed and goes to the Lakers. There just had to be something going on. I know he was terrible in the playoffs, and they definitely got an upgrade in Ibaka. They've already got guys in Kawhi Leonard and Paul George who can score inside and guard on the perimeter. They needed someone who can do the defensive work on the inside. And hopefully with Ty Lue, they're going to realize Zubac is a good player and an important player. And if Ibaka starts struggling, hopefully they'll be fine to make that kind of switch. But at the same time, you look at the playoff performances, Ibaka compared to Harrell, completely different players. Ibaka goes from a worse player than Harrell in the regular season compared to the last couple of seasons Ibaka's played in the playoffs. He's been a complete positive. He's been able to stretch the floor, hit mid-range shots, and protect the rim. He's an interior presence on the defensive end of the floor, which is something they needed. He's a versatile offensive guy, which you wouldn't have thought about him a couple of years ago, but he is now, and he can stretch the floor and shoot the ball. Everything he does is better than what Harrell's going to provide in the playoffs, and look at what Harrell provided in the playoffs. Now, he might be better for the Lakers, but the reality is we're looking at what he provided last year because that's kind of what you need to go off in terms of a basis as to how this Clippers team can improve, and don't think of Montrezl Harrell as the 15-point per game kind of guy that he can be and probably can still be in the playoffs if everything goes to plan. But look at him as one of the worst players in the entire playoffs last year. I'm sorry, it's the reality. He's had some solid playoff performances before and he's had some good regular seasons, obviously. But if we're just looking at last year's playoffs, he was terrible. Now, there's some factors that went into that, but we're just looking at last year. And if you want to compare last year's Clippers team to this year's Clippers team, there's no way Ibaka's not better in the playoffs than Harrell. There's just absolutely no way. Harrell was so bad. He was one of the worst defensive players. He was getting absolutely torched by Jokic. And then offensively, he wasn't doing too much either. He was a complete liability, and they've upgraded that position in a big way. So that's a huge upgrade that people aren't talking about enough. And then you look at a team. They had a 3-1 lead against a very good Denver Nuggets team and had 3 occasions where they were up by double digits in 3 of those games with all the internal conflict going on. Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, during the regular season, they played about 30 games together. 30 games together. And you're trying to get that chemistry up? They played about 30 games together, and you're expecting them to have the same chemistry as guys like Anthony Davis and LeBron James, who spent a whole season together working on their chemistry. No, the reality is their chemistry wasn't there, and they're going to need to play some more games together. And I think by the time the playoffs roll around, that's something that just shouldn't be underestimated, how much a difference their chemistry could make, because I'm a big Nuggets fan, as I said, but they should have beat the Nuggets, even with everything going on with Harrell performing like an absolute terrible player. Another player, Lou Williams, he was awful. Like anything else from Lou Williams next year can't be as bad as last year. If they trade him, anything they get from that kind of standpoint, defensively and even offensively, you're looking for him as an offensive player. Do you know what he shot from the field? I don't remember, but it was bad. Like, think of bad. It was worse than that. That's all I'm saying. These two guys that were supposed to be the difference. We knew Kawhi Leonard and Paul George weren't as talented as LeBron and AD. They were in the same kind of ballpark, maybe a step below. But the reality is they prided themselves because they had those guys that led a team to 50 wins the year before. They lost some of them, but it was like, if this team was that good last year, mainly down to guys like Lou Will and Montrezl Harrell, then that's the difference, the depth. And those two were terrible. So you're going to get an upgrade from Harrell and you're going to get an upgrade from Lou Will, even if it's just him being better, which is impossible for him to not be. And another guy they brought back, Luke Kennard. Let's talk about Luke Kennard because people were laughing at his $64 million 4-year contract. I've got news for you, Lakers fans. If you're watching this video, you're probably not. You've probably already clicked off it. You've probably already disliked the video. He's better than Kyle Kuzma. He's better than Kyle Kuzma. He's a very, very good NBA player. The first time Luke played in the playoffs. Second year, this was before he even broke out into the player he is. He didn't have the same confidence playing against the Milwaukee Bucks. His best teammates are Reggie Jackson and Andre Drummond. Blake Griffin's hurt. Those are his best teammates going up against one of the best defenses in the entire NBA. He averages 15 points a game on incredibly good efficiency, and by the end of the series, he was having the best defender on him. He's going to be good. He's a good playmaker as well. That's something he really developed. He's really good in the pick and roll. He's a great mid-range shooter. He's a great three-point shooter. Luke Kennard is a fantastic signing. The only thing about Luke is if he can stay healthy. That's something we can't predict, but he's had injury concerns. That's the only thing. I think if he stays healthy, he's $15 million a year. What you get from him, 15 points a game, he can give you 4 assists. He can play with the second team, with the first team. He'll probably start on the bench, and I'm sure he'll be in the closing lineups. Again, another comparison, because we're doing this. We're comparing last year's team that was so bad that still nearly made the Western Conference Finals, that was so terrible. Let's compare him to someone like Landry Shamet. You want to talk about Lou Will and Montrezl Harrell being bad? Yeah, Shamet was as bad as that as well. Those three of the guys that they were supposed to get good production out of, absolutely woeful. And you bring in Luke Kennard, he's going to be so much better than Landry Shamet. He's just a better player. And some of his defensive downfalls, I mean, when you've got Kawhi Leonard and Paul George likely to be surrounding him, I'm pretty good with his defense. I think he's going to get the worst offensive player. And he's not that bad. People have said he's the worst defender in the league. How do you even get that? Like, how do you know who's the worst defender in the league? It's just, no. Marcus Morris re-signed. That was an overpay just because of his age. He does his role. I don't think he's going to be as impactful as Luke on offense, but he gives you a different look on defense. He's someone who's a pretty good defender, and keep in mind, he's someone that gave LeBron a bit of trouble. I know everyone's probably going to give me the numbers like LeBron dropped 45 a game on him. Yeah, I don't care, but the reality is LeBron gives everyone work, but if you're thinking of it in terms of people who have given LeBron some kind of trouble, Marcus Morris, Boston Celtics against the Cleveland Cavaliers, he gave him some kind of trouble. Like, as much trouble as you can give LeBron. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Because obviously the Clippers are going to have to go through the Lakers, so they have to keep that in mind. And they've signed Marcus Morris, and it's a bit of an overpay, but whatever. He's a good role player. He's going to help the team. Getting back to the star players, I think we're going to see a redemption year from Paul George. I think he's going to have a big year. People want to talk about how he hit the side of the backboard. He was absolutely terrible against Dallas. He was actually pretty good against Denver. No one really wants to give him credit for it. They just remember him hitting the side of the backboard, and he was bad in the last game. But the games prior, he was actually pretty good in that series. So make of that what you will. I think he's going to have a good year this year. Like I said, he wasn't healthy. He didn't play enough with the team. And I think these guys are going to get a lot more reps in during the regular season together. Kawhi Leonard, Paul George. I think they're not going to take this season for granted like they did last year. And the chemistry issues probably won't be as bad. There's just a lot of reasons this Clippers team is going to be far better. And as much as it's funny to look at last year and say they absolutely failed, I mean, they were one game away from making the Western Conference Finals, no matter how you slice it or dice it. They were one game away from making the Western Conference Finals, and they should have made it, even with every single existing issue. I think they might have upgraded at coach. Ty Lue actually is probably an underrated coach. He did some things for that Cavaliers team that really went unnoticed. I mean, everything was about LeBron, and LeBron was clearly the key to it, but when they were actually a good team before it just kind of fell apart, he did all right. So I don't know if it's an upgrade at least it's a lateral move, and then he might have a better kind of say in the locker room. They just might mesh better. The reality is it's about the players. It's about Lou Will performing, Ibaka being a huge upgrade on Montrezl Harrell, Luke Kennard being a huge upgrade on Landry Shamet, Kawhi Leonard performing even better than he did last playoffs and not taking it for granted, and that chemistry getting back to its best. Paul George getting back to his best as well, which he looked kind of like he was getting there in that Denver series, but then obviously the last game came around. Clippers aren't going to be bad. They're going to be a contender. They're probably the second best team in the NBA at the moment. So get all your jokes out, because once the regular season rolls around, the LA Clippers are going to be a serious team. That's it. Yeah, it was a bit of a ramble. I've kind of made a few ramble type videos. Once the season rolls around, I'll try to get a bit more in depth into what I'm seeing from teams. But at the moment, it's kind of hard to do that because there's so many moving pieces that you can't really see what a team's going to roll out. There's a new coach. There's a ton of new players. There's a ton of new things going on. So I can't really go into in-depth kind of how the game's being played. But the reality is I can just look at the acquisitions. I can look at all the moves they've made, and everything suggests to me they're going to be a lot better than last year. And this was a team that still should have made the Western Conference Finals last year. So the Lakers are the better team at the moment, but let's not write off the Clippers. They're getting underrated now. Who would have thought last year the Clippers would be underrated now? Yeah, they're criminally underrated. So that's what I think about the Los Angeles Clippers. If you did enjoy the video, a like would be greatly appreciated. Subbing to the channel as well. Other than that, I'll catch you next time.